Hey there, it's Robin, and you're listening to the Healthy Habits for Midlife Mamas. This podcast is all about you, your health, your wellness, and making those 1% shifts that can transform your life one step at a time. Here, we're going to explore simple, holistic strategies to help you thrive and not just survive in this beautiful midlife chapter. From whole foods and movement to mindset shifts and spiritual grounding, I'm going to guide you through all of it so that you can feel your best inside and out. If you are ready to reclaim your energy and make wellness a priority, you're in the right place. And if you're loving what you hear, don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps me and you to reach more women just like us. Now, let's dive in and see what we can find. Hey guys, before we jump into today's amazing episode, I just wanted to tell you what I've been up to lately. So as most of you might know, I have been diving deep into synthetic food dyes and how it affects our children. A couple of weeks ago, I showed a documentary. If you guys were not local or you missed it, and you also didn't listen to the podcast, please go watch and listen to episode 88, where you meet Brandon and Whitney, who are the producers of the documentary. You also hear about the documentary, their journey, and where you can watch it and what you can do about it. So what I've chosen to do is push an initiative here in Florida to ban synthetic food dyes in our schools. So if this is something that you believe in, if this is something that you want to get behind, I would love it if you would go into the show notes of this episode and the episodes coming in the future and click on the petition and sign it. And not only just sign it, but take it one step further and share it with your family, other loved ones in your family that are not maybe local. You don't have to be in Florida to sign this. Anybody that comes in contact with children, pediatricians, daycare centers, teachers, caregivers, neighbors, really anybody that has a passion for children's health and wellness. Anybody who wants to get behind the initiative. So just share, because the more voices, everybody's voice matters. And the more voices we can get behind this initiative, the more that our local and state representatives will listen. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to visit the petition, check it out, sign it, and share it. And let's get into today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to today's episode. I am really excited to be introducing you to Melissa. I feel like we have a lot of the same beliefs from different versions. And so I'm super excited to have you guys meet her, and I can't wait to learn from her. So welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. We were chatting. She lives in Arizona. We were talking about the different heats. I'm in Florida. She's in Arizona. And so we were comparing notes on our heat situation, but all good, right? So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself so that we can all get to know you a little better, and then we can talk about some of the amazing things you've done so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a wife, I'm a mom. We've got a 16-year-old daughter, a 14-year-old son. I'm in Arizona, and I'm also a holistic health and life coach. And I love to coach around helping teen girls and women find freedom from the struggle with food and really create a positive relationship with food and healthy body image. And that's all based on my journey, my story, and the fun ride I had to get here.
Well, thank you very much for holding space for that, because it's such an important topic, not only for women, but definitely for the teen girl. I think having two teens myself, girls, and so being, really surrounded by a lot of younger girls, seeing the struggles, definitely at times can be really hard and challenging, because, as a more mature adult and seeing kind of zoomed out, watching them kind of struggle through some things and then showing them boundaries and things like that. It's a very touchy but very needed subject to be discussed. So first of all, what led you to wanting to talk and teach and support women and teens in this area?
Yeah, I think it was my own journey and the struggles I had. And, it's so funny because originally I didn't start off with teens on my radar at all, but I feel like in the past few years, they've just kind of been falling into my lap. And it's like, okay, like I need to look at this. And for me, looking back, like my issues with food started in childhood. I was 8 and was hiding cookies and candies and Pop-Tarts and lots of sugary snacks in my room because I was so overwhelmed by what was happening around me and I felt completely out of control. So at a very young age, food very much became a coping mechanism for me. And so I think because of my journey and connecting all of the pieces, it was like, my gosh, who could have helped me when I was the younger version of myself? So I think that's where the teen aspect really came in for me.
I love that. And I think it's so true. And I talk a lot. I say the same thing is like, we've got to back this up. All the stuff that we're teaching to women, which is amazing. And these, midlife moms and women in general just need support and need to learn how to think differently a little, in some things, because a lot of times we're just conditioned to things and we don't even know it. And so, but I keep saying, we've got to back this up, so if we teach the moms or the women, they can teach their children, but then ultimately we've got to back it up to start teaching at that age. And unfortunately, it's not, people don't go into things thinking, oh, I'm going to do this to myself. They go in because number one, our society has really brainwashed us into this whole diet mentality instead of eating for health and wellness. It started, I know it all always boils down to the dollar, right? And how they can make money, but it was like, it just has gotten so out of hand that people don't even know how to think for themselves. So I'm curious, when you do back it up and you are working with these teens, where do you start with them? Because there's a lot of moms listening that want to help their daughters, right? And so where do you start the conversation? Because again, their brains are not fully developed to handle a wealth of knowledge, like we might be able to. So I'm just curious as your
Well,
perspective
and
on
I
that.
think that's the tricky part, right? Because the moms, that's the thing about working with teens, is a lot of their beliefs around food and their body and relationship with food are coming from the moms. And as you mentioned, so many of us have been, immersed in diet culture, and we've been infected with that, really. And so for us to give those girls a different perspective, we almost have to start with the mom, because the mom has to have that awareness that this is happening to me and I might be passing it on. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing. But then I think the other thing is you may have a mom who hasn't struggled with body image. And so she's like, what the heck do I do? I don't even know how to help my daughter with this because it's so foreign to her.
Right.
And so I
That's a
think
good point.
it's an interesting place to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really good point because everybody's bio-individual and everybody has uniqueness, within them. But the one thing you said that really like resonated with me was you were hiding food because there were things that were happening, there was chaos happening around you. And so could you speak a little bit to the controlling piece of it when it comes to living in chaos?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like it was the one thing I could control. I felt like things were so unstable. Food was a constant. It was always there. It's not going to leave you. It's not going to neglect you. Like it created, like it was this really unhealthy relationship of what I was looking for in food because I didn't have that around me. And so I think we've got to look at the relationship with food. We look at relationship to maybe ourselves, that sometimes we'll look at relationship with other people, but we don't think of it as a relationship with food and to ourselves because they're interconnected. The way we feel about ourselves and what we believe and how we show up is going to do the same thing in our relationship with food.
Yeah, and also I love that how you put that, but relationship with nature is another thing. People, again, we've been so pulled away from our natural resources and put in front of screens and, put in a four-wall situation where you're just being thrown information and it just, I feel like we're at a time, a very pivotal time, really, where, schooling needs to change a little bit and step up. We as individuals and parents, me included, need to, change the way in which we see things for our children and for ourselves. And, if you ask most adults how often they get outside and seek nature, again, I don't have the study, but it's from what I remember when I read the study, it's very small percent. And why is that? Like, why are we not? Because other countries don't do that. Other countries have breaks in the middle of the day where they can go outside and have a really like nice, long, peaceful lunch. And again, we've just been so conditioned to grind, grind, grind. But eventually, I know as a woman in midlife, going through all these changes where your children are leaving and you're also in the midlife changes, it just eventually it comes back and you have to deal with it. It's like you can push it down for a long time and you can neglect all the things, but eventually it comes back up. And so my hope and desire, and passion is to help people before they get to that point. But if you're already at that point, let's start to do the work, so that you can live the best next chapter of your life, and momming is not easy. There's no manual for momming. There's no instructions, and every kid is different, no matter if you have one or four, I mean, the reason they don't come with manuals is because they're so crazy different, right? But I believe that my children are my children to really reflect things to me that I need to work on, right? They really bring that up. So, um, back to the food though, like, how have we gotten to a place where people can't see beyond a diet? How do you think that we got there? And then how do you help people step out of it?
I think the first step is just even being aware of like, how has this impacted me? And I think it can just even be a simple exercise, Robin, like sitting down and just giving it some thought. Like we don't think about these things. We don't question, where did my beliefs about food come from? Was my mom a chronic dieter growing up? Was my mom a chronic overeater? Like, what is my family history with food? And even giving some pause and curiosity around that. So I think creating awareness and getting curious and doing a little digging is a great starting point, because then you'll be like, wait, why do I feel like I always need to have really unhealthy sugary snacks when I'm going on a road trip? Why do I feel like I always need to go to the drive-through at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon? Why do I think that I need to go to the bakery every time my kid gets an A on their report card?
Yeah. I love it. Again, I feel like we're just such mirrors of each other, because the very first thing I do with anybody is let's look at your story, because if you don't know your story, you can't, it's really hard to make a change. But just by listening to you say that, one of the things that just popped up is in our house, the way that we grew up, there was always dessert, right? There was always dessert. It didn't matter if it was a special holiday or not, there was just dessert. And I remember when I started having my kids, my mom was like, what dessert can I bring? And I'm like, well, we don't need dessert. Like, we're just having dinner with the family. We're just spending time together. We can do a puzzle after dinner. Or they can have fruit. Like, we don't have to have cookies and cake for every meal. And so that was something that I had to like unpeel from my history of like, this is how my entire family was. Even at big gatherings, it's like there's dessert at every meal. It's so I love that, because I do think knowing what you've come from helps you to know and see and become aware of what maybe you have just been robotically doing without thought. The next thing you said was pausing. I think pausing in all circumstances gives you and your brain the space to then get curious and ask those questions and not have the knee-jerk reaction that we typically do, right? And those knee-jerk reactions are going and getting for the A, or, it's like, what else can we do? And how is that going to serve the purpose for my child or for myself in this moment? And I think, again, it's a lot of self-reflection and self-talk that we have not been trained to do. So absolutely love that. Root causes. So curious, because that's one thing that you mentioned. What are root causes? Everybody's is different, but I'm sure there's ones that you see repeated over and over and over. And so what are a couple of root causes that might give some of the listeners today like like maybe I should investigate that, or, ooh, that sounds interesting. Like, how does that involve me? Because today I want people to just start thinking. That's all.
Yeah. I think a lot of times what I see is the women and teens I work with, there's been a history of stress that they haven't known how to deal with. So a lot of times they'll go to the food for that stress relief. They don't really have the tools to kind of navigate the stress or the stressful situation or figure out like a way around it. And I think too, the other thing is trauma. A lot of people have trauma that hasn't been worked through, and food has become a comfort, kind of like it was for me as a child. And so I think stress and trauma are really the two main root causes that I see.
Okay. And so let's just address stress, because stress is something that we are all going to encounter. It is not something that can go away, because that's part of life. What are a few tools that you like to give to your clients to put in their tool belt? Because I'm all about building these 1% shifts. I'm all about what can we add to our tool belt so that in certain circumstances, we can pull them out and use them. So for stress per se, what are a few of your techniques, tools, tips that you have?
Yeah, I've got three. The
Okay.
first one is replace judgment with curiosity. Because I think a lot of times we will do something and we'll go into that knee-jerk reaction, like you alluded to, and we'll start to judge and we'll criticize, and then we'll start this downward spiral where we're just beating ourselves up and just saying terrible things to ourselves that we would never say to anybody else. But if we can stop that and replace it with curiosity and say, what was I looking for in this moment, or what did I need? Or what was going on that led me to this point? And if we can get curious, that I think creates the awareness of why we do the things we do. So I think that's a great one. I think the next one is the 5-5-7 breath, where you breathe in for 5 seconds, you hold the breath for 5 seconds, and then you exhale for 7 seconds. And that syncs the body and the brain, tells everything to calm down. We kind of trick the nervous system. And so that's a great tool. I think the other thing is to slow down. If you eat your meal in 10 minutes, shoot for 15, shoot for 20. Like, we get stressed because we're usually rushed. We're moving too fast. There's too much going on. So slowing down, pause can be a really great thing to implement as well.
I love that. And I definitely want to go back to number 2, which is the 5-5-7. And I say this a lot, and I'm going to continue to really say it, but your breath is the best tool that you actually have. It is something that is built in for a reason. It's free. It's super easy to use. You don't have to go anywhere.
Nobody knows you're doing it.
And exactly. But you have to start the practice though before the stress begins. If you're trying to implement something while you're in a stressful state, you are going to have a challenge and you are going to say it doesn't work. But if you can start to implement it once in the morning, once in the afternoon, once at night, and you start training your body, because your body has to get used to the idea, because right now, if you don't have any tools in place, your body is really riding on that fight or flight. And so it's waiting for that moment to come because it's used to it. And so we're creatures of habit, and so is our body. It's, so if I could encourage everybody today, just if you are still not quite on board with the whole breathing aspect of being a tool, it's coming up again in this conversation. I feel like it's coming up a lot. So to me, that just means that it really is something to give thought to. 5-5-7 box breathing. There's a lot of different breath works. Some of them have different usages, but you can use them all. So if you know one and you don't know the other, it's okay. Just get curious, try it out and see how you feel, because ultimately, if you're somebody who lives a lot in fight or flight, when you start doing this practice, you should feel your body decompress. And if you're not feeling that decompression, you just have to keep practicing or try a different breathwork practice. Again, everybody's body is going to respond differently, but the feeling that you should get is one of like release, let go, that kind of a thing. So if you have questions about that, you can definitely reach out to Melissa. You can DM me. But I think that this is just so powerful. I didn't want it to go without a larger conversation around it. The other thing, slowing down. I think, again, we live in this very fast-paced life that we allow. So that's the narrative I want to change. We allow these things because, again, it's a conditioning and a habit at this point. And so in order to change the habit, we have to put a blocker in place, which pausing is a blocker. And so it's okay to pause for a minute. If you don't get to do one thing that day, but you were able to feed yourself, your soul internally, it's okay to miss that thing. And I think as moms, we just put our blinders on a lot and we just go for our kids. We do a lot for our kids. And I'm not judging that at all, because I did the same thing for my children. But I just started to realize that for me personally, when I don't show up as my best version, I'm not being a good version to them either. And so that is sort of how I started to reframe things, was around based on my kids, I guess.
Well, and I think to that point, more is
Yep.
caught than taught, right? Like we can sit here and we can tell them, oh, you need to monitor your screen time. We need to have limits. But on the flip side, if you're always on the phone and you don't have limits yourself, there that I think speaks more than the words that come out of our mouth.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to totally throw myself under the bus, but I find that when I am engaged in my phone,
Mhm.
I am not present.
Right.
And there'll be times where my daughter's like, "Do you hear me?" I'm like, and I go back, I revert to this thing that I remember when they were like tiny kids. And it was like, when you're in the middle of something, if your child wants you, don't just drop everything. It was like, you can acknowledge them and say, I'm in the middle of something and I will be with you in 2 minutes. And I just feel like as they've gotten older, I've just stopped doing that because they're
Mhm.
18 years old, but at the same time, that's respect. And so I've been working because I became aware of that by her saying something. I was like, ooh, that's not good. And so I'm trying to flip some of that stuff and go back to, hey, I really want to hear what you say, but I am in the middle of something. If I'm scrolling, that's not it. But if I'm in the middle of an email for work, or if I'm doing something, if I'm half listening in both places, I'm not really giving my full self to either one. So again, nobody's perfect. We're going to go through these ebbs and flows, but I think curious and awareness and pausing can really help you to not live in that space, right? To keep coming out of that space, and I call those dips, but keep coming out of the dips faster and quicker, so that you can keep meandering on a more peaceful path. Okay. And then trauma. I think trauma, I definitely want to touch on a tad bit. I know we could talk probably for a week on that, but I think when people first hear the word trauma, they have a vision that comes to mind. And along the way, I've learned lots of things. But there's big trauma, there's little trauma, but trauma is really the way the event affects you. It's not the actual event. And so you're shaking your head. So could you talk a little bit about that just to kind of peel back the layers, and explain?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I think I heard a definition once. I'm going to try to remember. It was something to the effect of trauma is when the body doesn't have the resources that it needs to navigate through an event or circumstance.
Okay,
So
I love that.
no definition, right? It's not the image that we think in our head or what we've been shown on TV that we view as a traumatic event. I think it's just something that the body has gone through that it didn't have the resources to support us in that time where we needed something different or we needed something else. Um, and I think too, the body holds on to trauma. So we may, do all of the work in therapy and EMDR and all those wonderful modalities that are out there. But if we don't work through the trauma in our bodies, it's likely to be remembered and stored, and we're going to get triggered and we're not going to know why. And so I think it's really important to do holistic trauma healing, for sure, because the body does retain trauma. It keeps score. Books about that, two great resources, The Body Keeps Score and The Body Remembers, highly recommend. But I
I'll
think
drop those
it's
in the show notes. Don't worry about
yeah,
writing them down.
just important to note that it's not this big catastrophic event like we've seen on the movies or in TV. It's an experience you've gone through, whatever that may be. I mean, doesn't have to be life threatening per se, but your body has just needed more support. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of us because we're stressed, we're overwhelmed, we're.
hmm And especially at a young age. And, as I kind of got to know trauma a little bit better and I started to really understand it, I was able to look back to a childhood event and see that it was traumatic for my body, for me in particular. And I thought I had dealt with it, but it kept resurfacing. So to me, it was, again, the body wasn't fully, because I didn't have the tools back then, but I've since been working through it. I mean, and again, it wasn't some catastrophic insanity, but whatever it was really affected me in a way that also changed a little bit of who I was. So I wasn't as authentic, and it really made me a little more reserved and pulled back from people. And, it was just very interesting. And I think when you're so young and your brain's not fully developed, when somebody says something to you as an adult, sometimes we take it very different, and they don't even know that they said it, that it even bothers you. And so, and a lot of times you don't even know as a child, you just, oh, I must be wrong, or I must be bad, or I must be this, or, and it's like you just go on with life. And then, like you said, your body does. Those books are amazing. So I definitely will drop those in the show notes. But speaking of books, before we go to your book, is there anything for trauma related things? You just mentioned like therapy, like, so that's from the neck up, but we were also talking about, ridding it from the body or expressing it. What are some of your favorite tools to do that?
Yeah. I haven't done anything along the lines of the somatic work, but I've heard
Mhm.
that great for trauma in the body. Haven't experienced it personally again, but um, I think for me, it was the breathing was a big thing. Because it was interesting when I would get massages, my massage therapist was like, "You're not breathing." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And so it was like, okay, so the breath work was a really helpful tool for me with that. But I think too, just the awareness and working through it and navigating through it, I think chiropractic is amazing because it realigns things, it resets things. I think massage is great. Body work, I think anything where you're able to release toxins and things that have been stored up in your body, it's always helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And like you, I just have been getting into somatics, super like interesting, very enlightening. And also, again, I feel like sometimes it's a buzzword, but really it's just your body releasing, right? And so it's just learning tools and modalities in order to do that. And I do think that that really is the last key piece for transformation with when trying to come out of a traumatic thing or bring it back up to get rid of it so that you're not suppressing it anymore. I think that's a really helpful tool. So I have many episodes on somatics at this point, but what I love about the episodes that I have is that they're for all different things, right? They're for momming, they're for caregiving, they're for, understanding yourself better, so I like how people use it for different things. And I think that's super important to also mention because it's it serves for a lot of different purposes. And I think that's important because we're all different places, right? We're on the same journey, but we're not on the same journey. And so it's taking that into consideration. So I want to talk about your book. If you could tell a little bit about it, is called Finding Freedom, which I love the title, but tell us a little bit about it, why you chose that title, and then where we can find it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's basically my story, my journey, my relationship with food, and the tools and things that I did to find freedom from that. There's some tools I learned through my health coach training in there. There's some pages for reflection because I do think a large part of this journey is about awareness and connection with yourself and your body. And so many of us are disconnected. So it's kind of talking through that. It's really how, like, the steps I took and steps I don't do one size fits all. So it's kind of like a protocol for people who could do something similar, not exactly the same, but similar to find freedom from that struggle. And my struggle was with food and stress and overwhelm and emotional eating and poor body image and not liking myself and low self worth. And they were all tied together. So really, that's why I chose the title because it was my journey of finding freedom.
And so now, and again, I love how you put that this is your story. This is what worked for you. It may or may not work for somebody else. But what I always tell people is there's never a one-stop shop. So you're going to read something and you're going to take a percent away. And you're going to watch something and you'll take a percent. And then you're going to see something and then and so it's just about putting ourselves in situations to where we can gobble up the 1% so that we can kind of create that own, our own path for freedom. Because ultimately that's what this is all about. It's about a feeling, and the feeling of feeling free to be authentically you is the end result, I think, for most women that are seeking better health, that are seeking better wellness, whatever stage of life you're in. But definitely in this like empty nest phase, it's like, oh, who am I now? Like, I'm never going to go back to who I was prior to children, right? I'm forever, it's changed. And so now I've got to refigure out. But also, what I love to tell people is that when your children do go to college, it's not like you stop being a mom. You're just, your role shifts a tad bit, but they have adult problems, right? So now it's not Johnny looked at me sideways. It's how do I pay for this? Or, oh my gosh, like this is coming. And so it's just expanding your role out. So we still need the tools. We still need the tools to parent and get to know ourselves a little bit. I love that you wrote this book, Ditching the Diet Culture Mindset. Tuning in, changing the lens from outward to inward really helps with the transformation, part of it. And also not comparing, right? If there's the judging part and then there's the comparison part. With all that gets thrown at us, the comparison thing is a real thing. And even you might not even know that you're actually doing it.
Yeah.
And so, that's another place in which we can start to reframe things and ask, why do I want this? How does this work for me? How is this serving me? Not necessarily, just because I want to look like so-and-so or be like so-and-so or have what so-and-so has. I think that we're a society that has a lot of nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's about shedding some of that stuff to get to the insides, in my opinion. So what would you say to, somebody who was like, this sounds super interesting. I'm curious, about what you have going on or what wellness looks like. What are some, it takes people time, right, to start investing in themselves. They don't just like wake up out of a dead sleep and say, I'm going to, it's like most times you have to go through things over and over and over, but it's like they finally do get to a point, where it's, for myself included, I was like, this is enough. Like I'm done. Like I need to do it different so I can get a different result. So what would you say to people who might be curious, on where to start?
I mean, the great thing is to get curious,
Yeah.
and maybe do some journaling and self-reflection on what do I really want? What do I really want to see happen? And what's the path that I can take to get me there?
Yeah, I like that, because if you don't have a vision, you can't really go anywhere. If you don't have a path, you also can't get anywhere. But with that path comes a mindset of flexibility and adaptation, because if you've ever been on a path, like in the woods, there's lots of veers, right? There's all different ways you can go. And I just think, for me, at least, type A personality, I want the straight shot. Like I don't like these veering off, getting more comfortable with the veering off, but they're just a time where I personally, in my personality, I like to have control. And what I've learned is you are never going to have control ever. And nothing, every circumstance you can look back at, where has you don't have control. So I've just really been, over the last 6 years, learning to just release, and the freedom with that is awesome. So again, that's when I saw your book title, Finding Freedom, I'm like, it can go in so many different ways. And for me, it was just letting go of perfectionism, control, thinking that I had to do something some certain way, and just allowing things to come and allowing for space and vulnerability and all of the things. So love, love, love it. How can people find you? Where can they find your book?
My book is on Amazon. And they can find me. They can also find the book on my website, which is free, the number 2, the letter B, coaching.com. So freetobecoaching.com. There's freebies on there. There's resources, access to the book, some other books I've been a part of, like a compilation type thing. So lots of resources.
I love that. And all of that will be in the show notes. And also she has social media. She's on Instagram and Facebook, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So all of that will be in the show notes so that you guys can get to know Melissa a little bit better, start following her. And again, if she resonates with you and where you are in your journey, reach out. Like this is, one of the purposes of this podcast is to give you the resources and to help you find the people that fit your path, because you don't know until you know, right? So, well, I hope that you guys were able to take away a few 1% this week. I can't wait to hear what they are and how you implement them, and maybe, some results that you get, whether it's a positive result, a challenge, whatever it is, because again, the more we can talk in community and support each other, the more growth we will see within ourselves And then that ripples out to other people as well. So thank you so much for coming on. I really, truly appreciate your wisdom. And I can't wait to continue to get to know you a little bit better and follow you and your journey. And who knows, maybe we'll meet up in another circumstance and teach together.
That would be wonderful. Thank you for having me. I've loved connecting with you.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you guys next week and have a great day. That episode had so many great takeaways. I hope you feel inspired and more empowered to make small 1% shifts on your wellness journey this week. I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you want to leave a review, share your thoughts, and let me know how you're going to be implementing these 1% shifts into your life. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with another mama who could use a little wellness love. Want to stay connected? Join me on Instagram and Facebook at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Check out my website at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com for more resources and grab yourself some freebies while you're there. Until next time, I hope you find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to come your way. See y'all next week. Love to y'all. Hey guys, before we jump into today's amazing episode, I just wanted to tell you what I've been up to lately. So as most of you might know, I have been diving deep into synthetic food dyes and how it affects our children. A couple of weeks ago, I showed a documentary. If you guys were not local or you missed it, and you also didn't listen to the podcast, please go watch and listen to episode 88, where you meet Brandon and Whitney, who are the producers of the documentary. You also hear about the documentary, their journey, and where you can watch it and what you can do about it. So what I've chosen to do is push an initiative here in Florida to ban synthetic food dyes in our schools. So if this is something that you believe in, if this is something that you want to get behind, I would love it if you would go into the show notes of this episode and the episodes coming in the future and click on the petition and sign it. And not only just sign it, but take it one step further and share it with your family, other loved ones in your family that are not maybe local. You don't have to be in Florida to sign this. Anybody that comes in contact with children, pediatricians, daycare centers, teachers, caregivers, neighbors, really anybody that has a passion for children's health and wellness. Anybody who wants to get behind the initiative. So just share, because the more voices, everybody's voice matters. And the more voices we can get behind this initiative, the more that our local and state representatives will listen. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to visit the petition, check it out, sign it, and share it. And let's get into today's episode.